first thing we need to do is approve the agenda. And whoever would like to make a motion to approve the agenda, I would ask that you add an item to approve the minutes, which I failed to actually put on the agenda. And then I'll just walk through it verbally. So do we have a motion to approve the agenda with the addition of April minute approval?
Motion.
Is there a second? Okay, all in favor? So I'm sorry to rush us. I actually went back and timed all these items, and we are really, really close on time. So I'm going to announce a time when we get to each item, and let's just see if we can stick with that so that we can wrap up on time. So at this point, our next item is approval of the April minutes, which, as we agreed, were emailed to everyone for review. So a motion to approve the April minutes. Donna Davis makes a motion. Is there a second? Second. And all in favor of approving the April minutes as distributed? Any opposed? Okay, that was unanimous. Our next item is the appointment of student positions for 2013-14.
I have a recommendation.
Well, there are actually some specific requirements that I was trying to see if we can here. We are required by the school system guidelines to have those two positions as follows. One is the president of the student body. So that would be the student body president, which has been Courtney Burton, who's now graduating. So whoever that individual is for next year would be one of the people.
That would be Joey Weiss.
And that is Joey Weiss. The other person is to be the president or lead officer of a non-elected organization, such as Beta Club, National Honor Society, or anything else that we might think of that meets that category. So it needs to be an established organization, but not a position that would be popularly elected by the school.
Any grade level?
Well, it's whoever, yes, but whoever would be the chair of that, or president of that organization would be the candidate. So what we need to do is decide which organization to choose from of those non-elected. In other words, I think the intent is that it's something that's earned rather than popular vote. The ones that were mentioned in the correspondence were Beta or National Honor Society. So did you have what?
Either one would be acceptable. I probably would suggest the National Honor Society because of the standards that are in place and the criteria for selection. I don't know who the president of the National Honor Society is offhand, though.
Yeah, and actually, it's probably better if we make the decision without knowing who the individual is, because we're supposed to pick the organization. Any other thoughts about that?
I thought NHS first also, but then I thought maybe Beta Club, just because it's a different cross-section than, when I look at student government, then I look at National Honor Society, Beta Club is a different cross-section of kids. So it'd be a different,
Can you just say a little bit more for those of us who might not be as familiar?
Beta Club is a different cross-section of kids in NHS. I think about the kids in NHS and the kids in student government, there's a lot of overlap. But I don't share a lot of kids between, they tend to be younger too. Like younger kids tend to be in Beta Club instead of NHS. So the voices represented would be from our younger kids in the school.
And is the Beta Club more service-oriented? Would that be appropriate?
Typically.
I'm just trying to get an understanding of that.
We have an academic requirement and then the service needs.
Okay, so we have a suggestion for our National Honor Society, we have a suggestion for Beta Club. Thoughts?
I'm somewhat ambivalent based on the input that Joel provided. I'm happy with either one. So I like the greater cross-sectionality.
Cross-section meaning not only age, but interests. perhaps? Okay.
Yeah, I just realized I share a lot of kids with NHS. I don't share kids with Beta. So.
Well, and academically, there's, you know, it gives people more opportunities. It seems like a lot of the opportunities always go to the highest academic kids, and then there are some great kids that could be great leaders, but they just aren't necessarily the best students in the school.
So I'm hearing some consensus around Beta Club. Would somebody like to make a motion that the second student be the leader of the Beta Club?
I move that the second student position be the chair of our Beta Club for the 2013-2014 school year.
Second it.
Kim seconds it. Any further discussion?
Perhaps adding an amendment, we don't necessarily have to stick with that organization year after year after year, but the idea that we can revisit which organization, perhaps this year it would be good to have Beta, next year it might be good to have something else.
Okay, so I think the motion as stated said for the 2013-14 school year. So I think that implies that we're making a decision for next year, but let's just make sure the minutes reflect that we would revisit this for 2014-15. Is that satisfactory? Can you read the motion out?
I was going to ask Joel.
Well, read what you wrote.
Motion was made that the second student be the Beta Club. Did you say president, or what are they referred to?
Chair.
Chair.
I wasn't sure.
For the 2013-14 school year. Does that sound close enough?
So is that satisfactory that then we need to look at it again for next year?
I would think.
You wanna talk
Second
about-
student on governance council.
Right. Okay, any further discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Abstentions? Wonderful. So the next thing on the agenda is the process for nomination and election of officers for 2013-14. And as a reminder, the school governance council guidelines for the charter system call for us to have a chair, a vice chair, and a secretary parliamentarian, all of which are one-year terms that can be renewed for another year. Currently, I am the chair, Donna Davis is the secretary parliamentarian, and we do not have a vice chair. So the task before us is before July 1 to elect a new slate of officers. I was trying to think of a way that we could do this that would maybe be more productive than expecting people to step forward at a public meeting. So I do have a recommendation, and we can see if people want to modify that at all. I regret to say that Mr. Kadish has indicated that he is going to step down from the governance council next year. His position is an appointed position by the principal. That position continues under the charter system. I think we would maybe wait and see the status of the new principal and allow that person to appoint someone. But that's not something that we as a council need to address. But we want to thank you for your contributions. And we'll see you one more time before you escape from us. And the reason that's relevant to this discussion is that I would like to recommend that we put together a nominating committee between now and the next meeting that could do some thoughtful work and maybe make some contacts to bring forward a slate of officers for us to consider. And I would like to recommend that that committee be made up of Joel Kadish and also of Deborah Davis, who is on her way here. But Deborah has indicated several times that her schedule does not allow her to serve as an officer, so she's basically taken herself out of the running as an officer. But she has agreed to serve, as has Joel, as a nominated committee. And I thought we could invite the students, Courtney Burton and Christian Reeder, to just communicate with them if they thought that there was anybody that they would like to suggest, and that way we'd have students, faculty, and parents represented on a nominating committee. So at this point, I would entertain any thoughts about that, including whether anyone else would like to be part of the committee.
Martha, the slate of officers comes from the existing board, is that correct?
That is correct.
And we don't have any open positions that need to be filled at this time on the board other than the faculty positions, is that correct?
And the student positions.
And the student positions.
That's correct. Thoughts, reactions to the nominations process?
Now, for next year, are we all supposed to maintain our positions, or how does that work?
So you are, everybody on the council is on the council for next year in the same role. So you are still a appointed staff member. And then we will roll off based on the length of the terms we initially had. So I, for example, will be rolling off.
It was my understanding it was a 2-year position as an appointed
Right.
representative. So I was wondering where I was standing, because I've been here for 5 years. So I
Yeah,
don't know if that's
so
something-
I think one of the issues we need to address next year is that the existing charter does not have term limits for the appointed positions. So for that reason, both as I understand it, you and Joel Kadish have been continuously appointed. That will no longer be allowed to be the case. Those will be 2-year positions, and in the first go-round, what we might want to think about is the position that's appointed to replace Joel will be 2 years, and then you would roll off. But yes, that phenomenon would not happen.
Yeah, I'd like to give the opportunity to others, to
Yeah,
also.
understood. I think that's the intent. All right, so back to the question at hand. So there's a proposal on the table that Joel Kadish and Deborah Davis serve as a nominating committee for officers with input from our student representatives and bring a proposed slate back to our next meeting. Is there any more thought or comment on that? Do you have a better idea? There you
It's
look.
gonna be hard, well, it's gonna be hard to fill your shoes. I mean, you have so much knowledge, and, you know how to run a meeting, and you're definitive in that. So, whoever steps into that position is going to have those characteristics, to be able to, deal well with heat, as well as, all the good things that are happening. So it's, everybody is, kind of shied away from positions this year, so I'm just wondering, going into next year, what would make somebody feel more comfortable filling their shoes?
So let me just clarify one thing. I could serve as the chair for another year. Donna could also serve as the secretary treasurer for another year, but it will be the committee's responsibility to determine who the best people are for those roles for next year, and then the entire governance council to vote on that. So that's the process that we're coming to.
Another question regarding that, since we're moving to a new charter and we will be officials under the new charter, and you can be elected for a year and then you can be reelected for a second year, is there a potential, not that you're willing to at this point, but is there a potential that we could have you as chair for a third year?
Let's just cross that bridge when
I
we
know.
come to it.
But I think
I
it's
don't know the
important.
answer to that. yeah.
Okay, all right. But I'm just trying to understand when the term starts and what's official, since we're clearing off the old and coming into a new, then.
That's a good question. I think we're clear as far as our terms as council members, but we're not really clear as far as when the first term would actually be as a chair. So for right now, we know that since Donna's only served one term and I've only served one term, we are eligible to serve a second one for next year. So let's, kind of with that in mind. But it is not at all assumed that that will be the case. And so the nominating committee would have that responsibility, yes.
Proceeding with elections or appointments, I'm not exactly sure how it goes. The nominating committee comes up with a slate of suggestions, and let's say they nominate one for each. Do we vote just for the group, or do we have to vote for individuals?
What would you prefer? Because it's done both ways.
From your experience, have you found certain strengths and limitations with each
Yeah,
of the?
well, on the Spurn Amendment, my response would be that if there was any concern that any of the candidates might not be supported, then you'd want to vote on them one at a time, and that would probably be the more transparent process. So if that's what we would prefer, we can do that. You can always take it apart, you can always put it back together again, but you can't take it apart. So if you move it as a whole, and then there's an issue or a concern about one candidate, that makes it somewhat uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So we could have a separate vote on each position.
Okay. Any other comments?
I would not be offended in any way if anyone wants to be secretary. So feel free if you'd like to.
I will say the same thing.
I will not be in the least bit offended if someone else would like to be the chair.
Okay, so thank you to Jeremy and Deborah for taking that on, and we'll expect a report back. I'm sure they'll be.
No, Joel.
Joel, I'm sorry.
We'll have that all in 3 months. And anyway, I'm sure they'll be talking to several of you between now and the next meeting, so thank you. All right, just a very quick item. The new charter system guidelines do require that we all serve on some sort of a committee. And so at our next meeting, we will have a discussion about where people would like to lend their talent. We have communications, we will have budget and finance, we have capacity, and there may be others that we might want to look to as well. So just kind of be thinking about that. I did ask Mr. Blackwell, who's not in the room, to give an update on the out-of-attendance and magnet applications. Do you have that information, or should we
I
come
don't
back to it?
have it, I think we need to come back.
We'll come back to that. Also, the next item, which is the follow-up on the magnet criteria and participation, had Mr. Blackwell's name on it as well. So the next item is just a quick review of the 2013-14 budget. At our last meeting, even though we're not going to actually vote on these until the next meeting, when we talked about our own ground rules, there was a request that we consider something 1 month before voting on it. We do have to formally vote on the budget recommendation, which we would do in June. And so I asked Mr. Tash, I've just given you 5 minutes for this, sorry, to just kind of quickly highlight what might be different about the proposed budget next year from the one we currently have, because that's really, I think, what would be of most interest in this. He's already stated, most of this is driven by enrollment, and it's just a formula for how many teachers we have. So if you could comment on the other areas.
And really, if you should all have copies of the proposed budget, the allocations and whatnot for this coming year. To be as frank as I can, the budget has changed almost not at all. The only changes in the budget, really, in the discretionary budget, which we have some control over how we appropriate funds, the only real change has been that we have put more money into communications, and that initiative for next year, we put $7,500 aside for communications. That is going to an independent contractor. That is Lynn Miller, who's working with our website and with our newsletter. And I think you've seen some of the efforts that have been put forth already. That's money well spent. And I think our communications are improving as a result of that. That's really the only difference in the discretionary funding that we have appropriated for next year. All the departments have received at least the same, if not more, in terms of allocations based on the request that they made to the principal. The process for determining their allocations was a very simple one. Each one of the department chairs met with the principal and actually the assistant principal who oversees their particular area made their requests, and essentially we developed the budget around their request. On the personnel side of the budget, really nothing much has changed. It is driven by the enrollment that we have. So the number of teachers, general ed teachers that we receive is totally based on that enrollment projection, and we have to stay within that budget and allocate personnel based on the number of sections that we plan for next year. Mr. Blackwell's been very busy over the last 2 months, basically looking at the sectioning, determining how many teachers we need in which departments, sliding a little bit of FTE, full-time equivalency, from one department to another where it's needed. It's usually been a very subtle shift of personnel, maybe one less section in language arts, and that one additional section might go to science or math, depending on the numbers. Based on the freshman class size, the junior class size, we might have more at the 11th grade because of the population than we do at the 10th grade. So all those subtle changes really are plugged in. We're still, I'm happy to report, within our budget allocation for next year, we have just a minute amount that we're flexible with. We have to reserve a few judgments. In the budget, I've done what Chris Triola had done the year prior, and that's to allocate for 2 AA positions, or administrative assistant positions. Those are going to be somewhat different next year, probably, depending on what the new principal wants to do with those positions and how to assign those. As several of you were conversing earlier this morning, one of our administrative assistants is stepping down, is transferring to Roswell. That would be Mike Santoro. Our athletic director is going to be transferring there at the end of this year and moving into the program up there. His position was that of AA and athletic director combined, and there were a number of duties that were assigned to him. So that is subject to change, again, based on what the new principal recommends, and hopefully that takes place in the next 2 months or 3 months before the school year begins. So other than that, those are the only changes. It's a very much prescriptive budget that it was last year. Other than that, that's about it in terms of the explanation. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to entertain them. If between now and the June meeting you'd like to ask for clarification on anything, please feel free to just give me a call or come on in, and we'll be happy to go through it with you too. These are sometimes fairly dry documents, but you can see how the money's spread by just looking through it.
Thank you for that. It makes the process very transparent. We've got all the details we found. We will be discussing this again at our next meeting and actually taking the vote. Are there any comments or questions at this point? The only request that I would make, I have heard, and I think this is pretty reliable information, that several of our career courses have been limited with the funds that they have for materials and equipment. This might be a possible opportunity for the foundation and the PTA to support in the future, but I just would like to request that we look at that. I've heard that from the media broadcasting program, and I also know the engineering class this year were unable to complete their final projects because they ran out of money for the parts for the things they were supposed to make. So since we will be offering the IB engineering next year, I just want to make sure those kids have the full experience. So maybe Claire and Pam, you could also take that back. Pam at that budget committee forums to think about making sure those funds are available for those programs. Maybe that's a good place we could supplement because it's not people. Okay, I'm going to go ahead to the next item, and then Mr. Blackwell, you will be up and have all 3 of your items together.
Sure.
The next item is an update on the principal selection progress. They have been working to identify a number of qualified candidates. They've been, they being the school system, they are using some innovative and different approaches for which we commend them. And the interviews are scheduled tomorrow. So the representatives from the Governance Council will be Dr. Topkis and Dr. Square as the 2 teachers, and myself and Deborah Davis as the 2 parents. And I also know that the PTA and the foundation are a representative, and I believe they're trying to identify the required student representative. But our charter requires that we participate in the interview panel. I do want to remind the group, it is not our decision. It is the superintendent's recommendation to the board that will then give approval. If all goes extremely well, there is a possibility that this individual could be voted on Thursday evening. There's a lot of ifs in that formula. But just so you know, I believe there are somewhere between 3 and 5 viable candidates that will be interviewed tomorrow.
that's all we know at this point. Does anybody have any other comments or questions?
Probably not appropriate.
Is that open?
To,
No.
probably not appropriate to direct the question to you, but I think it would be helpful, maybe we could let some of the folks know, but it would be helpful to see the resumes before.
I asked that same question. My understanding, there's some confidentiality with that. They don't want to let it out early, but it would be extremely helpful for me. It would be great if we could Google them, understand something about their background, what they've done, blankety blank.
So
That's easy to overcome. I remember in business, I had to sign a non-compete agreement,
I said the same thing.
and so we could,
I would ask that, or suggest that you all make those comments tomorrow, because actually, yeah, we just had that same conversation last
The
night.
question is that tomorrow, it'd be great if we could do it today, because tomorrow are the actual interviews. So at that point, it's a moot point.
Yep, so why don't you all email Karen Cox and see if there's any possibility of that? And at least, and if not, at least we'll be on record as having requested that. I do know the first hour is provided to review the material.
and come
But
up
that
with
doesn't give us any
questions.
time.
Exactly,
I mean,
no, I understand, I'm not defending the
No, I know,
process, just
I know.
explaining. So if you all would want to do that, I think that would be highly appropriate. And if you don't want to do it, maybe Deborah could do it on our behalf.
Yeah, no, I will. I mean, we spoke about this yesterday.
All right, anything else? So just know we'll let you know whatever we know as soon as we know it. Okay. All right, moving back up the agenda, Mr. Blackwell, we had you for 3 items, and we probably got about 15, 20 minutes for those items. The first is the update on the out-of-zone magnet applicants. The second is, I think there were some follow-up comments you wanted to make about the magnet criteria and participation and enforcement. And then maybe seek some input on the strategic planning process. So, Mr. Blackwell.
Did you already give them the handout of the?
It's in the folder.
Yeah, it should be in the folder.
There's a folder in your handout from Mr. Blackwell that labels,
So one of the things that's included in your folder is a copy of a letter from the attorneys that Fulton County has on retainer, Nelson and Mullins. It is, yeah, if you wouldn't mind, thanks. It's addressed to Karen Cox. We're sharing it with you. It's on the subject of allowing out of district students into Riverwood. And, you know, to summarize, and you can read the entire response from the attorneys, but basically their answer is that because we are going to be a charter school that is a member of the Fulton County Schools charter system, and we're not going to be a conversion charter as we were or are, these things have standing, I guess, in their opinion that we can allow out-of-district students without a memorandum of understanding with that district. That particularly impacts, and then the sheet that I passed to you reflects this update, that particularly impacts, I believe it was one family that adds 1 student to our total magnet enrollment projections for next year. And that's the update on the numbers. Anyone have questions about that? Martha, do you need to say anything more?
no, the only thing I will point out is that this is in direct conflict with what we were initially told. So the email that we initially distributed said we were not allowed to do this, and so now the attorneys have been consulted and are saying, yes, we can. So since our amended motion did allow siblings regardless of address, the sibling in question that lived in Cobb County. Now, the only question I have is, I thought there was another sibling that lived in DeKalb County. Have they withdrawn their application, or?
According to Mrs. Herbert, there was only 1 student whom that impacted that she was aware of.
Okay.
So we'll go with that.
But again, it does, you know, as you said, it stands, so I guess if that did impact someone else that we're unaware of, then they too would.
Could you just check on that for
Sure.
us? Because I know there was a speaker at last month's meeting that was not the Cobb County family. So I just want to make sure we haven't left anyone out.
And that doesn't affect the overall numbers, because we still have only 28 that applied, and we had 30 spots, so we're still.
We're still well within our
Right.
parameters.
And then on the note, I know it's been a topic of conversation.
Can you hold on 1 minute? Did you all have a question? Okay, sorry, go ahead.
I know it's been a topic of conversation here in the council, and really to that end, you know, in many other places, about our magnet criteria and how well that's communicated, how that criteria is monitored, and whether that monitoring system has also been well communicated. Just in general, maybe lots of questions about that. And so I think what I want to say, so that we're all on the same page, is that we understand that there are certainly some things that we need to communicate better about both of those things, about what the criteria are for magnet, what that means, and then more specifically about how we're monitoring it. And this has come up lately because we have perhaps in ways that we haven't in the past started monitoring it with more fervor. And so we understand that that hasn't been communicated as effectively as it needs to in order for people to feel comfortable with the monitoring. And so we're going to kind of take a step back, make sure that our incoming folks, our incoming freshmen, are well aware of what that monitoring process looks like, so that they go into it eyes wide open, and you know, sort of trickle it down or up, if you will, from there. You know, start it when it's fair, so that the kids know, okay, this is what it means, and we can work with this group of parents and articulate it upward, if that makes sense.
Is everybody clear on that? Faculty, does that make sense from your standpoint? So the incoming ninth grade families would be informed, and then the criteria would be enforced as initially designed going forward. Is that correct, Mr. Glasbaum?
Mm-hmm.
The only other thing I would just, I said this last time, but just to reiterate, I do think there was some confusion from the students coming in from Ridgeview about the actual magnet application, particularly since many of them were not scheduled for magnet courses. So if there could be another opportunity to apply during the first semester? Thank you. Anything else? Okay, so this conversation about what does it mean to be in the magnet and having magnet courses that aren't required to be in the magnet, that will all be part of our strategic planning conversation over the next few months.
Can I just ask a question? I want to make sure I understood what you just forward. That they apply the first semester, meaning to come in January?
These are students who are in the attendance center.
I understand. I'm just understanding. I'm just trying to get a better understanding of what you just put on.
So I think there's as I understand it from Ms. Herbert, there's an application process that has to happen in order for you to have a magnet seal when you graduate.
Okay.
Yes.
The students coming from Ridgeview, since they're automatically coming to Riverwood, the fact that that application had to be done was a little confusing. And so my only request has been that if a student didn't do the application process, it has nothing to do with their ability to attend Riverwood, that they be given a chance early in the year to fill those materials out.
I thought it was talking about attending. I got you.
And just one question, I'm sure this is on the website, but not just the magnet requirements to get in, but the magnet requirements to maintain magnet status are on the website?
Well, or will be. We need to be clarified. And that's what I was saying.
Okay.
We need to clarify the criteria for what magnet means, and then the monitoring criteria as well. In other words, what one has to do to stay on
Keep the
track and
magnet
getting.
status.
Mhm.
And you can't get a seal unless you're magnet all 4 years, is that correct?
And-
Like if you've been a magnet student as a freshman, but then let's say you lose that status as a sophomore, then you work it back and get it back as a junior. What is the criteria to have the magnet seal on the diploma? All 4 years magnet? 2 out of 4 magnet?
Well, it would be, should be, you know, all 4 years, or, you know, really all 4 years. Now, if you drop off because of monitoring criteria, which we just discussed has not been something that we have communicated very clearly, so the fairness of that is, you know, questionable. But then, once you drop off, because we've given you warnings or whatever we articulate to be the then you're done. But if you satisfy the criteria, which I think we've talked about before, so I don't know if we need to dive into that real deeply or if it's a conversation for another time when we kind of spell these things out. But as long as you've met those couple of criteria and your participation has been consistent and you've not dropped off, then you are eligible for the magnet seal.
So I think the recommendation is that that in its purity would begin to apply with next year's incoming ninth graders.
And it'll be monitored this time, I mean, more so? It'll be monitored, meaning that if a child, for whatever reason, their grades or coursework or whatever it is, will they still be able to come to attend the school, just not receive the magnet?
Correct.
So once you get in here, that's it. It doesn't matter if you keep up what you came here for.
Magnet is just another point of distinction, which many of our students enjoy having.
Okay.
It would not jeopardize someone's attendance
Okay.
at the school.
Okay.
And you're asking out of zone.
Exactly. That's what I was thinking.
That
Because
doesn't
I thought that
jeopardize
was the
their out of
purpose
zone.
of them getting on the bus, is that they had to be
Yeah, it does
in the
affect
magnet
out of
program.
zone.
So I'm kind
Now,
of
out
confused.
of zone, it's different for out of zone kids.
Okay,
They have to apply every year.
okay.
No, they're,
No.
once they're in.
I didn't think so.
Once they're in, they're in.
They're in.
But if they lose their status, they may have to go back to their home school.
Okay.
Correct.
That's how, but it sounds like that's not what Mr. Blackwell is saying now.
It's, and I may have been misunderstanding the question, Ms.
Oh, I
Davis.
thought-
It's
that's
two
okay.
separate pots, remember?
Okay,
Because those who belong to us already,
Okay.
i.e. students who live in the attendance zone,
okay,
magnet or not, if they're on track to get magnet but then they drop off,
Okay.
it's not going to jeopardize their attendance.
Okay.
If they're not in our attendance zone,
Okay.
that's a very different pot of kids, and it would impact their ability to stay.
okay, my apologies.
No, that's okay.
I didn't clarify to you, so I
You
understand
might
how
not
you
know,
read
that's
it.
okay.
And that is a big point of confusion, both
Yeah,
for the
yes.
students who are out of zone, but also the students in zone. Because I've
Right.
had people who live in the attendance zone who did not go to Ridgeview tell me that they can't get in unless they're accepted to the magnet program, which of course is not correct. So there's a lot of room for confusion in this, which is why I commend you all for sort of, you know, hitting the reset button with this year's ninth grade class and really cleaning that up and implementing it going forward so that we're not accused of arbitrarily applying rules that weren't communicated to people.
I would just caution to make sure, and we all speak in our reality. So as I sit here on the governance, I mean, that's my reality, and we all speak from a position of their reality. Please make sure that that's overly clear, because we would hate for someone to think that they were kicked out unfairly.
Sure.
So particularly people out of the attendance zone, it really needs to be, yeah.
So thank you for that report and also for that, sort of, those thoughtful adjustments to the implementation. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just want to say, I wanted to underline your frustration over this new revelation. We spent a lot of time and effort and debate and, you know, discussing this, trying to figure out what was the fair and right thing to do, and all of that time we were doing it based on information that kind of led us down the wrong path. So it doesn't feel like that's the first time that's happened, so I
Yes.
hope it's the last.
Yes, thank you for that comment, and I also, what particularly concerns me is that there were children and families impacted who were on the, you know, on the fence, so to speak, and being told one thing by this body based on the information we had, and then fortunately it turned out well for them, but it sure would have been nice if this information had been available in January.
Martha, just in regard to that, is there a different process we need to be implementing? Because I question whether this would even have been uncovered had that parent not really pushed and taken it up the ladder.
Exactly.
And so is there a different process where we can find what the real answers are to some of these tough questions before? And I don't know whether we need to deal with this today, but
I think as we go through our strategic planning process, perhaps some of these potential scenarios will become clearer to us, so we can ask for opinions before we get there.
Okay.
But I don't really know how this could have been prevented.
Well, I was happy that we had a legal answer.
Yeah.
Because obviously charter this, conversion charter, county charter.
Exactly.
I mean, obviously you and I, on the governance council, do the best we can, sorting out these things, and a legal answer is one we have to go about. So I was glad we were able to have a legal answer.
And I think it did, if anything, I think we now know not to give up.
That's
right,
great, I
until,
think this is great.
There is sort of that final legal opinion. Okay, probably don't need to spend too much more time on this. Are there any other questions? But thank you for that.
Just one sentence along that line, is there any room for, semi-permanent legal counsel or counsel?
Yeah, I think I would recommend, that's kind of where I was going with this, is we look at the strategic plan and we think about what we want to be as far as a magnet school. Maybe there will be some specific things we could just go ahead and get. And there will come a time when we will be bigger again. Well, I guess we were never bigger, but we will have more capacity again. And we might be able to open up more broadly again. And so those would be things we want to kind of make sure we had those parameters clear in advance. All right, so on that note, why don't we maybe take about 10 minutes, if you could give us an update on what you've done so far. And if we have any immediate input from the council, we can entertain that. But I think in the interest of time, I'd also like to ask if people have ideas for Mr. Blackwell, that we email those to him before our next meeting. So why don't you go ahead?
I'll try to be very brief and beat your 10 minutes even, because I think many of you have seen the document that I passed along the table at the last governance council meeting, but I wanted to share again because some folks weren't here, but also just to keep you sort of abreast of what's going on.
Can you just make sure, let's make sure we all have it. It says,
School strategic planning process, but it's dated April 8th.
This meeting is beginning in the council office now. This meeting is beginning in the council office at this time. Thank you.
Does everyone have that?
yeah, I think
Okay.
it's in our folder also.
In brief, there's a very detailed strategic planning process that the district is, I would say, retraining us in, because strategic planning is not anything new to schools or to school leaders. The first two components of the strategic planning process that we're being asked to go through, one of which both of which actually involve the governance council pretty intimately, is what's called an environmental scan. That's the first thing that you see listed on the document, the first black bullet point. And then the second thing is what's called an organizational assessment. Broadly, both of those two things will be, let's see, how do I want to say? Outcomes of both of those two things, of the environmental scan, which I'll tell you about in just a minute, and the organizational assessment, which I'll tell you about, will be things that we share with Governance Council, that you will review, overview, discuss, ask questions about, and ultimately give input to and approval for as we go through this whole strategic planning process. Does that kind of make sense? They're for you to dive into and to analyze as well. So the environmental scan, the first component is this. It's basically a method to get all kinds of community input. Business leaders, educational leaders outside of our school, government leaders. There are several categories. And it's to identify what kinds of trends they're seeing in our community, what kinds of development is happening in the community, what sorts of resources might be available for Riverwood, as well as for them to give input on how they think we're doing as an educational institution. Lots of different ways that information could be collected, but our plan moving forward is to work with Hertz Ferry Elementary and Woodland Elementary and Spalding Drive Elementary all Sandy Springs schools, primarily because their schools are also being trained in these processes as well, but they're part of our community, to pull together some of these key members in the community to do kind of a facilitated question grouped kind of model, where we will ask small designed groups of these individuals specific questions, elicit their feedback, write notes, and then close that out. Although it's not a lot of time, we're hoping to do that at some point next week, and I'll be sure to let Martha know, hopefully later today, exactly when that will be, so that if governance council members could be in attendance, it would certainly be welcomed, encouraged if at all possible, although I know you all have busy schedules, and so it's not a requirement to do so. It would be kind of an interesting process, I think, for you to hear just what other individuals think about our school and what's going on in the community, as Martha referenced, you know, having an understanding of those things as we talk about what is Riverwood and what do we want our magnet program to be and where are we going and how are we serving kids. You know, I think those will give us interesting points to consider. So that's the first part, the environmental scan. I'll come back to it. And the second part is the organizational assessment. And that is a little bit more of an analysis of Riverwood itself. Includes things like parent, teacher, student perception surveys. We are expected to have a certain participation rate for each of those populations in those surveys. We don't design them. They're designed by a company called Advanced Ed, but we'll use the results of them. Analysis of all kinds of test scores, achievement data, analysis of or review of our conversion charter, to, you know, basically all kinds of things that might give us an understanding of what are we doing well at Riverwood, what needs our attention at Riverwood, what are our faculty's strengths, what are our students' strengths, and again, to help us kind of answer the question of where are we going, what do we want Riverwood to be, those kinds of things. And again, from both of those two, from the environmental scan and the organizational assessment, Governance Council would receive sort of the large outcome-driven statements, conclusions, thoughts that our leadership team will compile for you all and then want to engage with you all in discussion of. Questions about that? And then I thought I'd quickly share with you a list of the things that we plan to review for the organizational assessment, just so that you can, as Martha said, give me suggestions if you think that there's something else missing from that list that you would really like us to review, that you believe would help us, you know, get an understanding of Riverwood. And I'm also going to give you and please understand these are both drafts, but a list of people whom we are hoping to invite to the environmental scan. And you'll see some of them have my name attached to them, and some of them have, you know, one of the leaders from another school attached. But again, would be an opportunity for you to suggest someone who you think might be influential. So I'll pass that list out to you just as a draft so that you can look. But does anyone have any questions about those first two things that I could answer? For
the strategic planning group.
So our leadership team is going to convene just after our teachers' last day of work, but before they get too far into summer vacation, to start reviewing, I think I gave you all of them, but if you flip to the back of that document that's coming around, to start reviewing these things listed under organizational assessment, plus, you know, if there were anything from this group that you wanted to add to it or wanted to add for our consideration, we would consider that as well, but just after school.
So just to clarify, in the interest of time, we're not going to talk about this here. This is the list that the school leadership in Sandy Springs has come up with as people they want to interview for the environmental scan, and then the organizational assessment is data that the leadership team has asked to be considered. So So we want to make sure we look through this, and if we have other ideas of people or organizations that should be engaged, or data that should be examined, email Mr. Blackwell before next Friday. How about that? Which would be May 24th, which is the day after the last day of school. That would give them time to incorporate it.
And I do want to say, I mean, you know, so that everyone hears it, I mean, I do very much welcome your input and am asking for it. So please don't feel like that's just a blanket statement of, oh, okay, we can offer if we so choose. But I would really love your input on both fronts, but even in advance of Friday for individuals in the community who you think might have a unique perspective to discuss the community and things about Riverwood. So please do take that opportunity if you can to give suggestions.
Do we have any way of identifying alumni? Do we have an alumni list that we've built?
I'm not sure if we do, so that makes me think probably not.
Put that on your suggestion. I mean, there may be a Facebook page we don't know about.
Right.
Other questions?
And I think just to kind of frame your thinking moving forward, that the June meeting that we have set will probably be a time, I hope I'm not jumping your agenda too much, Martha, but will probably be a very ideal time to begin looking at some of the things that leadership has analyzed in terms of the organizational assessment, and then as outcomes from the environmental scan. So that's sort of moving forward. I think what we need to look at is talking about some of those things, even if they're in draft form at the June meeting.
So, one thing, I just want to, I brought this up at the last meeting, but the visioning session that was done that the foundation supported, if we can make sure that those results are tabulated and incorporated in this, because that did not make it to the Governance Council, and that was, I think, a really beneficial process.
I don't know that it made it anywhere.
I was told Mr. Triolo had it.
Yeah, I don't think the foundation's even saying it.
Okay, so that would be a good thing to be able to.
I had a,
Yes.
just Mr. Blackwell.
Yes.
Quickly scanning the list here, do we have groups that perhaps represent the Latino community? And I'm not sure what Community Action Center work does, or Leadership Sandy Springs, but there doesn't seem to be any groups here where we're taking into account that community, and I think that that would be important for us moving forward.
I'll work with Ms. Gonzalez to try to do that. We had talked about trying to get perhaps some of the folks who you know, manage some of the properties along Roswell Road to come to those meetings, but also need some other suggestions. So please, if you know of some, or Ms. Gonzalez, that's exactly why we're asking, because we need additional input about, you know, making sure that we capture everyone.
Yeah, I was gonna suggest a couple of places
Yeah.
that would be helpful to be part of this.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else from my end?
Just a quick question, I noticed the elementary school, so is anybody from Ridgeview part of the SLT, or reaching out to them as well?
They're not in this group of schools, so they're not going through this process. The schools that are going through this process are the ones that are in the
okay.
first
Cool
year.
word.
So Ridgeview's not required to participate. But that's not a bad idea, Mr. Blackwell. Maybe we can make sure whatever you guys do come up with, at least it's shared with the other schools in the cluster, so they have the benefit of it and don't repeat it.
Just curious, is North Springs in this at all?
Yeah.
I just wanted to see if it's okay with government council. So they can make their copies and do things they need to do as a.
Yeah, it's fine with me.
Thank you, thank you.
We'll just, we're all
I
discussion.
shared it, and I crunched actually shared it.
Apparently there are students lined up who have some
Yeah.
end of the year projects they need to work on, and they're not, the scientists are not allowed in. So are we comfortable with letting people start to
We need to
come
take
into
some.
the next
Is
meeting?
that okay with you all?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, we'll just talk about it. Okay. I'm gonna ask, I'm going to ask permission if we could go to the bottom of the agenda and work our way up, because I do want to get this next meeting date resolved, and then I do think there's a slightly, a couple things we need to talk about that maybe if we go next meeting date, review of existing charter, capacity committee, and then communications committee with the notion, Claire, we may have to bump you.
It's okay, then have a hand up in case anybody hasn't.
All right, so our next meeting, is that okay with everyone? Okay. Our next meeting is currently scheduled for June 11th. So that, there's good news and bad news about that. The bad news is school is out, teachers are not on contract, employees are not on contract, so they would be here on their own time. The good news is that it is not a school day, so we would have potentially time for a slightly longer meeting to deal with some of the environmental scan information, as well as some of these additional action items that we need to take. So just wanted to see how people feel about that day, if we need to look at an alternative day.
I know I'll be out of town.
June 11th, it's a Tuesday.
What time?
We can be flexible on the time.
Can we check who was gonna be available, who's out of town?
Who would not be here other than Claire Martin on June 11th?
I'm not sure, I'm not sure if I'm gonna be here either.
We come to your house?
No.
So, why don't I do this then? Let me just ask this question. Are people okay with meeting sometime in June? Particularly you all. If we found a date that worked for you.
Depending on the time, but yes.
And so what's your time? Do you have a particular time of day you're not available?
Well, if it's Tuesdays in June, I'm not available in the late afternoon. Or any, some work.
Yes. So are you not available in the mornings at all?
Mornings are out.
Okay.
And Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday afternoons are out.
Until when?
Something there.
Or
Until June 14th?
To the entire month of June.
Okay. All right. So we'd be looking probably at a Wednesday after like 11? Okay.
My grad school stuff for the summers, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. It's pretty much all day.
And when does that start?
Maybe Friday.
June 11th.
All right, so Friday.
Friday.
All right, so what I'd like to do in the interest of time is to send an email with the Friday dates, maybe starting with that May 31, and going forward through June, and let's find a day that most of us can make for what would might maybe be more like a 4-hour session, and we can work through some of these things. Is that acceptable? Bruce?
But, Fridays aren't great for me because I work Fridays.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe we'll try to start as early as possible. Because Friday afternoons in the summer are not good times to be on the highway. Anyway, okay. So then our next item is, we had a conversation last time about the need to review the existing charter, conversion charter document, and really understand what had been proposed and requested in that. Particularly, I think it would be great to have that to go into this strategic planning conversation. And Mr. Tesh has a recommendation for how that could get done, and I'm just going to ask you to share
I think
that.
the easiest way to do it, unless the council wants to dive in to the weeds basically on all the aspects of the charter, is to bring it to the attention of the leadership team here at the high school and work with our department chair and administrative team to look through all the waivers and all the different aspects of the original charter, and then make recommendations to the governance council based on that conversation and review at some future point.
And would it be possible for us to have that by this June meeting?
That would be up to the new principal and
If the,
Mr. Blackwell.
if
We'd
the
like to get it
council's
done
in,
quickly.
agreement that that is an okay way to proceed, then my hope would be that that the leadership team could include that as part of our late May day of looking through that.
Thoughts?
Well, I think it's a place to start, but I'm concerned without the leadership of principal. I'm concerned now that Mr. Santoro has resigned. I'm concerned that Andrea Little is also, I shouldn't say resigned, but they're transferring. And these were some key players who had knowledge of the school and experience. And so I'm wondering the degree to which there would be a thorough and complete assessment because we don't now have some of the key players in place to go through that. So we seem to be stuck again.
Do you have an alternative?
Unfortunately, I would like to bring one up, but that was my initial reaction and I hadn't thought through.
So let me ask this question. Would it be appropriate to have that done as a first step? So at least we can get information about what's included, what's been exercised, what hasn't been exercised to think about. And then maybe we could have a second step where we could ask for people's insight into the real initiatives that need to be taken in the future. I don't think we're really looking at a future-directed conversation as much as just an analysis of did we ever do this? Some of the things in there I read through and I can't see that they ever were actually implemented, but I don't know, and I think that's why having faculty go through that would be more helpful. So at least we know what happened and what hasn't happened.
I agree. So what faculty, what leadership?
My thinking was that if we engaged with the department chairs, some of whom have been at this school still for a long time, I mean, may not have been as intimately involved in writing the charter, although there will still be some people on that leadership team who have, that we would kind of get a swath of people who should know a good bit about, you know, what we were when we designed that or what we've been since it has been in place. All, as Martha said, just with the intent of not necessarily making a forward-looking statement as a result of it, but just saying what was in here. Is it something that we did? Is it something that has value to looking at as we consider future statements? That was my thought, Dr. Kopis, was that, you know, if we got that group of, 15, 17 people, that we would get folks who know a good bit about it.
I think it's a great first step to have data, and then, a lot of blanks to be filled in after that, of course, and I don't know that the council has the capacity to do it, so I think that's a great recommendation.
I mean, I'm not trying to set up any objections and saying, no, I don't think, I think it's something that we need to consider, and it seems that you all are going to be very busy with lots of tasks that would normally be delegated to individuals who are not here. I mean, this is small hour. And these are...
So let me just comment on this. I think part of what is concerning to all of us, and maybe what's behind some of your comment, is that this is a difficult time to be doing this work when we have some pretty significant holes in the leadership team. And so I think just so people are clear, what we're asking for is a retrospective analysis of what's been done, so that this council and the new leadership team can make recommendations about what needs to happen. But that conversation will be happening after school starts. So I don't know that we have a better alternative than to ask whoever's in place now to go through that conversion charter document and at least give us some input to work with.
And then, of course, the extremely simple side that comes out in regard to the legal documentation that we received okay, we say it's this, somebody else says it's this, how do we get final clarification? Anyway, and now I understand that this is a first step. I agree, it's a first step, but
So there is going to be a process that will be communicated later for how we go about requesting additional waivers. And I would suggest confirming the ones we think we already have. That hasn't been communicated yet. So as soon as that's available, then we'll embark on that. So we're sort of walking blindly into the future, but I do think having the leadership team give us some sense of what we've done and haven't done would be an important first step. Okay, any other thoughts on that? All right, well, thank you for that suggestion, Mr. Cash. So, Claire, I do think we're going to have to defer your actual report conversation, which is important, but we'll do that in our next meeting if you want to send it out.
I know I gave some people some, if you don't have one, I'll just leave it right here. It's just, just discuss this and go over what we've done and what we need to work on.
So if we can all look at that before the next meeting, and then we can provide some feedback as far as our communications processes. I do want to give Bruce an opportunity, and we have about 5 minutes left, unfortunately, but if you could just share maybe the recent meeting we've had.
Sure, yeah, and jump in, guide me. Very briefly, before going into the history of why we formed this committee and what we're trying to do, but the most recent development is that during a board work session, Patrick Burke presented his working document, kind of evaluating what all of our options are for the Riverwood and Hertz Ferry joint campus, separate campus, just kind of explaining what their process has been. They have put a good bit of work into it. Mr. Tesh and I were actually at the meeting, so we had an opportunity to read the body language of the school board and get a sense of kind of where they were going with it. I think our opinion at the end of the day was the board gave him the clearance to think out of the box and to not try and jam a prototype high school onto this space with a prototype elementary school. That just would not work. There's not enough room. It would be too expensive. It would be way too disruptive to the school. So in our conversations with Patrick afterwards, he felt like he had the authority to now hire architects to look at some innovative ways, possibly in staging some things here for Riverwood so that we best utilize the $32 million that has been allotted to us. It's going to be a challenge, and it's not right there yet, to get the additional funds that we need for a brand new high school. And a lot of our thinking about savings of Hertz Ferry here and Riverwood here, that's kind of fallen by the wayside. I think the board recognizes that the best solution is for Hertz Ferry to have a brand new school in a new location off this property, and that Riverwood would have the opportunity to design a building that fits the remaining 50 acres, which is a typical kind of high school site. And our 50 acres is really not even a typical 50 acres because of the topography and all of that. So that's kind of where we are right now. We're still working with Mr. Burke to try and give our input. There are some concerns that sales tax collections are down off of what they projected, and since we're kind of at the end of the list. But I felt pretty good, didn't you, Ron, as far as the board having a real understanding of what's going on at Riverwood, what our challenges are, and some board members willing to, I think, look for possible funding outside of the SPLOST. So it was, I'd say it's progress, and it's encouraging on some levels.
And I need to just make sure I update the governance council on this additional piece, which is that a group of us were invited to meet with Karen Cox and Patrick Burke, which included Bruce, but it included the governance council, the foundation, and the PTSA representatives from Hertz Ferry and Riverwood. We reviewed the material that I sent all of you in advance. I will tell you, if you haven't gone and watched the board meeting, I would suggest that you do so, because as Bruce indicated, the questions with the board members were very revealing.
what really became clear is if there is an attempt to house both of the schools on this site, it is not in the best interest of students. It involves significant retaining walls, which if you've ever built a small retaining wall, you know they are inherent with problems. These would be huge. They would be in areas where students would be located. In addition, the elementary school would be without a gym and a playground for at least a year. They would be without parking for at least 6 months. And this school would be without tennis courts, softball fields, practice fields for at least a year, as well as a significant reduction in parking for at least a year. The construction project would go on for at least 4 years, during which equipment and material would be needed to be moved along Hertz Ferry and Raider Drive and those surrounding roads, because there is no other way to get in here. So in addition to the fact that, as Bruce said, the typical high school is on the size of property that we now have both schools located in. So for Riverwood to be able to expand and be on par with other schools in the school system would be very difficult, smushing Hertz Ferry on the same property. So the group of us who were in that meeting for the leadership organizations have agreed as individuals to sign on to a communication stating in languages that it is our firm and unanimous opinion that it is in the best interest of all of the students as well as the surrounding community for Hertz Ferry to be located on a different site. Because there's a lot of unrest about that in the community, and so I just wanted you to know that that is in the stages of being drafted. The other thing I wanted to kind of bring up before we adjourn is that it's very clear that there is a need for advocacy in the community on the part of both schools around the need for renovation or rebuilding. There is some misinformation, primarily among people without children in the school system, about the growth within the attendance zone and also about the condition of our facilities. So I did mention to Mr. Kadish, I think this would be a fabulous opportunity for our student government to maybe get involved in some advocacy, maybe some videolog type of demonstration of the physical constraints of the buildings, interviews with students, maybe some comparison to some of the newer facilities. And I just wanted to let him comment on whether he thinks that might be appropriate.
Well, I've already decided, or the kids have already decided next year we want to focus more on advocacy instead of just activities. And I thought this would be a good start. As much as the kids always talk about how much they like classes and everything else about the Riverwood experience, sometimes that not blinds them, but they forget what it's like in other high schools. They travel to their high schools, they come back and they tell me how different it is and why is this. The energy is already there. I think this would be a very good outcome.
And I think Bruce's committee would have some insights into things that we might want to ensure the students highlight.
Sure.
So anyway, I just want to get those two things on the table before we had to adjourn. The one thing I think was very encouraging, Bruce, was that Patrick Burke clearly said that once this decision's made about the Hertz Ferry's moving off the site, then we can have a much more inclusive conversation about what the Riverwood design entails that would involve the whole school community. So I think we can look forward to that sometime next school year. So in our last few moments, are there any questions? Or Bruce, would you want to chime in about anything else?
No, I mean, that pretty much sums it up. I mean, as far as the capacity issues, that's really what started us down this path, was concern about overcrowding, but then, of course, with the adjustments to their projections, we're pretty much staying level. We continue to prod and ask for short-term relief for some issues. Obviously, best case scenario, we have a new high school in 2017, 18, so there's some short-term things that we'd like to try and do, but we're still fighting.
Martha, can I add, evidently there was a STEM coordinator for the county that made a visit to the school and walked through all the labs, looked at all the closets, all the equipment. And I don't know that we're connecting all the communication dots in that in terms of what were the findings and what is the recommendation short term, but that should seem to flow into what Bruce's committee's doing and potentially, Yeah, so I don't know where we connect those dots, but I don't think everybody's aware that that's going on behind the scenes. And that's a key piece, I think, for our short-term needs.
A report on that?
Say again?
Did you, either of you get a report about the visit from the
They are,
staff director?
they are doing some serious cleaning out of materials that are no longer functional, trying to create space where space has been nothing but clutter, and do a few minor things. We're limited in what we can do, but there has been some improvement, and I think right after school closes, some of the teachers are going to be working in that particular area to try to make better use of the existing facilities.
And we understand, anything that you have, knowledge, any report that anyone has that shows a deficiency to ed specs, that's helpful.
I will only give one statistic that we did in terms of understanding the limitations of this building. The footprint of this building is 78% of a new high school prototype. In other words, our square footage area, total square footage area is 78% of Cambridge or Johns Creek or any of the South County prototype high schools. In other words, we're 4/5 or slightly under 4/5 in terms of the square footage available for essentially the same number of students and different programs. So
I should say the usable square footage is
yeah,
probably.
it's even less than that, and we're 72% of Milton, which they'll never build.
So there's a lot of further conversation to be had about how much money there is, what's the possibility. I do think one thing we don't want to be clear about is that the SPLOST referendum talks about an expansion and renovation, but as we've discussed with the staff, there are creative ways to consider something a renovation. You don't have to keep everything in the building. But I think it would be best if we continue to use the word renovate and not rebuild, because that's what's in the SPLOST. And the question is, how much can we knock down and redo in that renovation? That's what we're trying to do. Yeah, we might just keep a little commemorative corner somewhere and build around it. I don't know. Okay. Any
Chimney.
comments, questions?
Questions?
All right, we'll continue to have this on the agenda. All right, anything else for today? All right, thank you all. I'll be in communication, and please remember to get back to Mr. Blackwell on the items to be considered.
I need the sign-in sheet, if everyone
Oh, if you
signed
didn't
in.
sign in,